You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with a grain market update from K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Dan, we had some USDA reports come out on March 31st and wanting to talk through those today, and the first one being the prospective plantings report.
Yes, these reports come out as really the first shot over the bow of the markets with regard to at least planted acres. And from there, we make yield assumptions and production assumptions that follow from that. We try to assess how uncertain yields might be throughout the year. How likely is it that we'll hit what the USDA has said most recently, i.e., trendline yields or something else, and then we start to formulate our expectations for where at harvest we might be. Supply demand balance and price wise. So that's where these things come from. And in the prospective plannings report that came out, there were some unexpected numbers. We saw the U.S. corn number, U.S. corn planted acreage estimate come in at 95.326 million acres, and that was above average trade guesses by about um, about 60, 70, 80,000 acres. So a little bit higher than expected. And there were some numbers coming into that. The highest estimates were 96.6, lowest 92.5. So we came in a little bit above average. And that number is up substantially from last year. Last year we planted in the US about 90.6 million acres. So 95.3 versus 90.6. And so you've got about a little over, if my math is right, about 4.7, near 4 million acres plus over last year's number. Again, 95.3 versus 90.6, and about a 5% gain, 5.2% increase. So yeah, that happening for corn. It's notable also that for soybeans, and for as much as in the U.S. Corn Belt, we bounce back and forth between corn and soybean acres. Soybeans came in at as a prospective plantings number, 83.5 million acres to be planted. We planted last year about 87.05. So we're down about 3.5, 3.6 million acres, down 4%. That number was just slightly below, even less than what the market was expecting coming into that report at 83.7. So overall, corn went up about 5%, soybeans went down about 4. Somewhat of a balance. There were some changes that I was kind of surprised by. And on the wheat side, all U.S. wheat came in at 45.35 million acres. The USDA's Ag Outlook Conference projected that at about 47 million. So we have even less than what we were thinking at the end of March. And so we're down about from pre-report estimates about 1.125 million acres. Winter wheat, and that's where we're mainly focusing on. We're focusing on here in Kansas, 33.315 million acres, down from the pre-report estimates of 33.9, so about 650,000. So what's the surprise is that these numbers are a bit lower than what we were expecting coming out of coming out of the early January reports we had. We had a winter wheat seedings, winter wheat and canola seedings report that came out, and so these numbers are even less than that. And other spring wheat came in a little bit lower than expected at 10.02 million acres, down about 500,000 acres than had been expected. A little bit higher durum, about 11,000 here in I guess the crop is that we focus on here in Kansas is grain sorghum. The grain sorghum numbers last year we had about 6.3 million acres planted in the United States, came in at 6.56, 6.6 million acres. So, given the challenging price scenario that we've seen for sorghum, born primarily of this export related issues having a lot to do with US versus China and those contentions. So we came in with higher sorghum acres, and I guess it kind of motivates us to think about what some of those factors are. The lower cost of production in some areas of dryness, uh, uh, some advantages for non-irrigated grain sorghum there. So all in all, grain sorghum came in better than thought. The big loser, acreage wise, although not in Kansas so much, big loser acreage wise was cotton. Cotton came in at expected U.S. plantings of 9.86, basically about 9.9 million acres. We were at 11.2 last year, so down almost 12%. So a substantial change. Uh, the national canola numbers were down some, about 6 or 7% at 2.56 or 2.6 million acres. So that is as it was. What's really interesting for us, Shelby, is to compare that to what's happened in Kansas. In particular, you look at that canola figure. So whereas the canola acres in the U.S. were down about 6%. We were up about 17, 18% in Kansas. And of course, now we have some canola crushing in facilities capacity in the state. So that's I guess if there's a place to take it, that gives surety to producers. So we've seen that, so that's something to watch. Cotton numbers in Kansas down about 100,000 acres, 1 million even projected. Sorghum up about 100,000 acres, up to 3.1 million. So about 1% higher. Sunflowers. We don't see as much about don't hear as much about sunflowers in the stages we had, but last year we were down to 10.5 uh, uh, 10,500 acres, pardon me. And this year came in at about 15. So I think a lot of what happened last year had to do with the closure of a crushing facility and uncertainty about market outlet. So that was in play. We don't talk a lot about hay. All hay in Kansas down actually about 80,000 acres this year. So there aren't many people out there with planters planting hay or new stands of hay, but overall we're down about 4% in terms of at least what we were measuring on March the 1st. Winter wheat from 7.3 million acres from 7.6 last year down to 7.3. It's continuing kind of a sideways to lower trend. And again, the corn versus soybean issue was in play also here in Kansas. Here in the state, corn acres 6.4 million, up about 1.5, 1.6%, and soybeans 4.3 million, down about 5%. So we were reflecting some of the change in corn versus soybeans, but some of the thunder perhaps of the corn acreage increase that we'd seen nationally was probably taken by sorghum coming in and taking some of those feed grain acres. So interesting to look at. I would say also for trade estimates that also we looked at quarterly stocks numbers. So not as much in play there. Out of that, I'm most interested in the usage numbers. So we get quarterly stocks as of March 1. What's that tell us for what happened during December, February through usage? So a little bit lower wheat usage than we thought was coming in. Uh, a little bit higher actually for corn, and I adjusted the old crop supply demand balance sheet that ends for the marketing year ending the 31st, just to reflect that. For soybeans, a little bit lower. A little bit lower usage than we'd expected. So these aren't major changes, but that I guess when the stocks numbers adjust either higher or lower, and when you're as you come into the end of the current marketing year that you're in, it leads you then to adjust the beginning stocks for the next year. So that's kind of what we've looked at then, and I do, if we have time, I can take just a real quick review of how these acreage numbers may have affected our outlook for corn and soybeans, if you'd like.
Go for
Okay,
it.
we'll go forth to do it. For corn, again, instead of plugging in 94 million acres, you plug in 95 and a half, and you look at the USDA's projection of 181 bushels an acre. Suddenly, you're projecting about 15.8 billion bushels of corn in the U.S. Ending stocks jump up above 2 billion to about 2.1. You're up to about 14% stocks to use. But in my own thinking, that's a trend. We haven't come within at least one, almost 2 bushels per acre of that number. So it's probably more reasonable to think about, say, a 178 bushels per acre. Then you're down to 15.5 billion, still a record high. If we have, and it's probably more like a 40% chance of that happening, maybe 30% of the USDA's projection. So my own thinking is that we're likely to get yields that are less than that. And if 181's probably a placeholder for the high yield, then there's about a 70% chance of something less. And when you look at these acreage figures, though, it looks like this year it's going to be pretty surprising in the U.S. if we get anything below 15 billion bushels of production. It's we have that many acres. And if you crunch that thing down to 172 bushels an acre, you're still looking at 15.0 even basically for production. So you got that. Now on the soybeans, just to close here, on the other side of the coin, here we've cut back soybean acres down to looking at projection about 83.5 million acres. With that, and plugged in a high yield, 52.5 bushels an acre, and just taking that plus the changes in the supply demand balance sheet, you're suddenly in a situation where you have about 290 million bushels of soybeans instead of 380 or 320 as an ending stocks figure that we've seen recently. And if you have lower yields than that, then you're getting below finally, or eventually, if you keep crunching yields down to say either 49 and a half or 48, you're getting below 4 billion bushels of soybeans, getting stocks to use below 5%, and prices they'd be reactive to a tight situation like that. So I guess to bring it all together, for corn, with the higher acres, it's going to be a bigger hurdle to jump to have any situation that really jumps prices higher. But for soybeans, as we've cut back acres now, any yield threat could probably bring a pretty reactive price response to the upside from just because now we've got a smaller base to work off of, and we'll see where it all goes.
Dan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Take care.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on agriculture today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead.